Detective Franz Wolf on the stand here in the Jonathan Price murder case out of Lexington, Kentucky. And yet another sidebar here. This presumably is how the judge is dealing with objections in this case, because we don't hear outright objections. We just hear a request to approach, and then everyone gathers around, and then things roll on from there. This detective is tying together a lot of different pieces of evidence. He's the one who interviewed the surviving victim in this case, the wife of Jonathan Price, who was killed in this case. Megan Price was the surviving victim. And he interviewed her 3 different times. And during the course of those interviews, she remembered a few additional details here and a few additional details there about exactly what went down. So that's what we're in the midst of right now. Want to speak just very quickly here with Joseph Scott Morgan. He's a death examiner who's joining us in studio today. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too, Aaron.
So quick sidebars here. Difficult case. We've got some issues about identification here. A few victims identifying these particular defendants. The ones who were present for the actual murder, though, not quite sure. What do you make of this case?
Well, these cases at this critical time can get rather convoluted, you know, in the throes of all of the chaos that's going on at that particular time. And many times people will misidentify individuals just simply because their brain will shut down on them. So you're having to fight through that, and that's going to be a question that will be brought up, I'm sure, in court. Let's keep in mind this witness that we have on the stand he's kind of the concentric area that's trying to tie this web all back together. So they're pulling on him from various locations, everything from weapons to talking about the forensic guys to talking about witnesses. So he's kind of that central point of contact in this.
Yeah, we've got some testimony picking up yet again here. So let's cut back to court in the Jonathan Price murder case.
I'm Lis Wiehl here with Law&Crime. It looks like we've got a sidebar here with the lawyers discussing something. It's hard to tell exactly what they're discussing. We've got the lead detective on the stand discussing something with the judge. With me here, I have a wonderful friend who's been here for a bit, Joseph Morgan. What do you think they're discussing? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it really is. I was just commenting with Aaron just a moment ago that it would seem that Aaron was commenting on the fact that it seems that this is the way this judge handles objections, which is kind of curious. And maybe she anticipates something coming up. This detective, Lis, has really he's gone around the barn a bit. They've given him a lot of information that led him down this road. He's talked from everything from visual identification to forensics to interview and even very elemental things, talking about what's common police practice, and that's important, but it gets a bit tedious after a while.
Well, you point out something good, which is that this is outside of the purview of the jury. Obviously, the jury is not hearing any of this. This is all sort of elemental. In other words, being set up before the jury is hearing sort of substantive information about the case. So this is not being heard by the jury. This is something that is just the lawyers talking to the judge before the detective is allowed to say something. So the jury is kind of sitting there sort of pondering, just like we are, sitting there in the courtroom wondering what the detective, now the detective is sort of sitting there as well, not being able to say anything. So we're going to go to a quick break right now and come back live with more testimony after the break. Let's go to a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, they're doing what this judge seems to like to do, which is go to a sidebar here to discuss something, whether or not the detective can go further and be asked a certain question, whether there's an objection going forward. It's interesting with this judge. Doesn't happen all the time with judges where they have these sidebars fairly frequently, but it can be a smart and effective thing to do because you don't want any issues on appeal if the defense feels like they haven't been listened to, they haven't been heard on their objections at trial, and especially at this level. This detective is going forward and going through some fairly basic things here, but is going to probably get to some pretty substantial things to have this trial. Joseph, what do you think here so far? What's your take on this and the amount, really, of these objections and these sidebars that we were having here?
I don't know. I was going to use one description of involving drinking from a fire hydrant at one point in time, but
what would that be?
It's very rudimentary, a lot of the stuff, because the prosecutor seems to vacillate between talking about specifics of the case,
right,
and then going to more broader generalities, if you will, as to how the cases are, what's the common standard for investigating these cases and what you have to do in the field, and that is very important. Depending upon whose court you're in, there's a level of variability. Some people just hit that real quick and then they move on to the heart of the matter. I'm wondering if there is a bit of fatigue that might go on with the jury here, because, like I use the term vacillate, they go between generalities and then some of the more specific things.
Yeah, they're definitely looking back and forth. You go through what's been going on over the last pretty much the last half hour, going back and forth, generalities, the clips, the gun, what was found, what the case, the five shell casings collected, what was the purpose of that, then going back. I wonder, sort of, maybe from the defense perspective, this makes pretty good sense, right? You kind of wear down the detective, make it kind of tedious.
Yeah, it is, and it gets tedious when you're under examination by either side, and they're picking at the minutia like this. When you start to talk about things like bullets, he's talking about the shell casings and all these sorts of things.
Right.
You've got my attention,
absolutely,
particularly as a forensics guy, but I would think on a jury, this is going to specifically hold your attention because you want to start to talk about connectivity between these separate events
and the victim.
And the seminal events. That's right.
Right.
And so you want to talk about that. People want to hear about the science behind this and how does all this connect back? And there's kind of an electricity and excitement that can be generated by that. You have the jury's attention, but boy, if you keep going back and forth, you kind of lose them, I think.
I think so as well. And here you go, back and forth with this, and you've got there's the lawyers up there. They're asking questions. They're going. The judge is giving some kind of instruction, but we don't know what that is. And the intensity of it, where the jury now is not being able to hang on the words of the detective, but wondering instead what the judge is saying.
Yeah, and I have to confess something. Many times when I was on the witness stand and they would go to sidebar, I would find myself kind of leaning in like this to try to hear what was going on. Of course, you can't most of the time because they're out of earshot, but even the witness that's on the stand, they're wondering what's going on, and of course the jury is. It's a head scratcher for them because they don't understand context. Most people that are selected into a jury pool have not spent very much time in a courtroom, so and it's kind of foreign to them.
Right.
And so they don't understand. Are we missing something here? Is there something that's bad that's going on here? Because she keeps calling everybody over, so it leaves them scratching their head a bit, I would think.
Right, exactly. So we're still on to this. We don't know what is going on there, but we will be. We're going to be having something shortly. Just back and forth with that. The detective. We just have to be thinking. What does that detective have? Now, on the other hand, it could be sort of a good strategy from the prosecution's perspective because it does sort of heighten the anticipation, if you will, for the prosecution of what evidence is what is the defense so worried about the detective sort of what does he have that the defense is so concerned about.
Yeah, and you want to know where this is going. It was alluded to early on in this trial that the defense was going to bring into question the validity of the DNA evidence that was collected from beneath the fingernails.
Right.
And I think that I don't know if that's the road that we're going down, but that's just one of the things that's probably in the background here relative to the defense. So it'll be curious to see how this all plays out in the end.
Exactly, exactly. So we're just waiting here to find out. This is live here in the courtroom to find out what is going to happen, what the jury, what the judge is going to do here with the detective on the stand. We don't know. We're going now, though, to take a break from the live testimony here, and we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to look at the top crimes of the week. So let's take a look at this. Top crimes of the week here from Law and Crime. Take a look. Peterson appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. Wow. Okay, thank you for Top Crimes, and now we are back live here with the detective back on the stand after that lengthy sidebar. Here we are live. Let's go back to the courtroom. Okay, another sidebar. What we have found out is that the previous sidebar was about a recording between one of the defendants and his wife, of a recording of a conversation, Joseph, between one of the defendants and his wife, of a conversation. Now, of course, the issue there would be marital privilege. And, of course, that would take time to be decided in front of the judge. Now, my question, and weigh in here, because this is not a rhetorical question, and viewers weigh in, what do you think, is why wasn't this decided before the trial?
Yeah, they had to
this
see.
This doesn't make sense to me. They had to see this coming down Fifth Avenue. Since we're in New York, I can say Fifth Avenue. Why wasn't this decided?
I know, this is kind
in
of
a pre-motion, a pre-hearing,
significant matter, isn't it? I mean, you
kinda.
Yeah.
You have, look, you have a recording, what we understand from our top secret, sleuthing producers who are fabulous here at Law and Crime, is that the issue was of a recording of a conversation between one of the defendants and his wife. As the kids say, duh, that's going to be an issue of marital privilege. Right. That should have been decided, in my mind, before getting to trial. I don't understand why this is now an issue taking up the jury's time, all of their time, judge's time, and for the detective just to be sitting there and having it decided.
Yeah, and this goes again back to these generalities. We're talking about this broad spectrum of evidence, and here they are. They're marching this thing. Since I've been here, I've heard a variety of types of evidence that are being submitted or considered in this, and now we have what I would assume to be a privileged conversation.
Yes.
I would think that you would have some level of expectation of privacy,
sure.
Between a spouse and an accused.
I mean, these things can be waived, one or the other. It depends on who holds the privilege.
Right.
Can waive it. There's certain exceptions, furtherance of a crime. There are always certain things that, can be decided. But these are usually legal arguments that are made, and usually, okay, here they fit, whatever this. Now, this was not necessarily the same thing. This is now another sidebar that looks to be done. Now we have the same detective on the stand again, testifying. This is just strange, though, to me, Joseph.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. All right, let's see what's happening now. Okay, in this case, we are now very accustomed to their having questions with this detective on the stand. So in this case, we are going to go and listen to a replay of some very interesting testimony a little bit later. But right now, we're going to just look at this interesting. Joseph, it's just so fascinating to me that in this case, very unusually, that they have so many sidebars about the testimony. But we had a little peek a few minutes ago about one of the issues that was at issue. And one of the issues was a recorded conversation between one of the defendants and his wife. And that stunned me. And the reason that it stunned me was, if you've got a recorded conversation between a defendant and his wife, that right away, and you want to get that evidence in as a prosecutor, the recorded conversation, right away, 101, first day of law school rule of evidence is that you're going to have an issue of privilege.
Right.
So why in the heck are they? Wait a second. Okay, Joseph, I want you to answer that question.
Yeah, sure.
But I can't get you to it right now because we're going to go back right to trial. So back to the courtroom live. Here we go. Back. It's unclear here whether they're taking a break or not. But what I was trying to get to you, Jonathan, before I was so rudely interrupted by the ongoing live trial, was. Could you understand why something as big as a conversation that had been recorded between a defendant and his wife, which would obviously be the subject of a marital privilege, would not have been decided pre-trial? Why would be waited until now?
I have no idea, because the judge would have been aware of it.
Yeah.
Both counsel would have been aware of it. And so it is curious, and that's something that would have been taken care of in pretrial motions. I can't imagine this is housekeeping that they would be doing in the middle of this thing, which again goes back to this idea, have they covered everything as thoroughly as they should have in this particular case? Because this is going to be a key point of interest here. We don't know what was disclosed in that conversation.
This is a death penalty case.
Yes.
Death penalty case. Mm-hmm. A man died here. A man was
Yep.
brutally murdered here.
Yes.
All right, let's go back to this case now. Back in courtroom live here. So we've been watching the lead investigator here being questioned back and forth. It's gone on for quite a long time. This is actually critical testimony for the prosecution. The prosecution has to establish with this lead investigator some major things. The forensics here are absolutely critical for the prosecution. That's why you're seeing things take some time, the back and forth with the judge on making various motions going that are taking some time. Look at, you can see right here in the courtroom the deliberations going on. Joseph, from your forensic background, and you have so much, and it's great to have you in the studio. Thank you for once, as opposed to Skyping in from Atlanta or New Orleans. What do you think so far from a forensic perspective as a death investigator? How this is going for the prosecution from the prosecution's perspective? Are they getting in what they need to be getting in?
Yeah, and then some, Lisa. I think that two critical areas. That is the photographic image.
Yeah, we've just been seeing. Yeah, we've been seeing some of that.
And also what they've been alluding to, the identification of the weapon and shell casings, and being able to tie all of this stuff back. And that's critical, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to putting the perpetrators at the scene and putting the weapon in their hand. Mm-hmm. And that's how all of this ties back. And sometimes it seems rather tedious, but you have to go through various steps in order to facilitate that. The question is, are they wearing the jury down with all of this? And again, I present to you Exhibit 1 right here,
okay.
with another sidebar. Yeah.
Okay, so we're seeing this again and again and again, that they're having these sidebars, that they're questioning, they keep coming back to the judge, they keep asking these questions. In your experience as a forensic investigator, would you be the person sitting there on the stand? Now the detective, the lead investigator, would you be the one sitting there? And if so, would some of these questions have been already answered by the judge so that you wouldn't be the one just sitting there while all these sidebars are happening?
It all depends on the nature of the case and the judge who controls the court and what they're going to allow to be said, because lots of times the things get repetitive and you sit there over and over again.
Right.
And it seems very, very tedious at that moment in time. You don't understand where they're going.
You being the forensic investigator?
Yeah, and you just kind of sit there and you just listen to them, and you try to be as mindful as you can the entire time and stay focused, because it's really easy to let your mind wander off.
Okay, but you're the one that's been there. You've been actually gone through all the evidence, and you're saying even you on the stand, it's easy for your mind to wander off?
Oh, yeah. Very, very, you're human.
Wow.
You're sitting there and, you're thinking about things, haven't eaten, I'm thirsty, all these sorts of things that are coming to mind.
This is a death penalty case.
Yeah, I know. And I've got other cases
that
I know. And how much longer is this going to go on? And you don't see any end in sight. I'm wondering if this guy's feeling some fatigue at this point in time, because they are really, really putting it to him at this point in time. And this is just the prosecution's case.
Right. Interesting. Fascinating. All right, we're going to have more. Joseph, thank you so much for that analysis. It's just so it's great to get it from your perspective, as sitting up there, because you're the one that's usually from that perspective of the detective sitting there. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Law and Crime. More testimony live from the courtroom. This is a death penalty case, folks. We'll be right back. All right. A big question in this case is how the defendant allegedly got a hold of the gun that was used to shoot down this Marine dead to begin with. So let's retrace a little bit of that right now and replay some of the testimony, and then I'll bring our forensic expert in to analyze this. Let's do that right now. Okay, a lot of things going on right there. We heard about confidential informant, CI. We heard about a controlled buy. We heard about the firearm being exchanged in that controlled buy through this confidential informant, CI. So I want to bring in our forensic expert again, Joseph Morgan, who is with Jacksonville State University in Alabama. You just showed me, let me just see on the internet. I love it. It's great. I love that logo there in Alabama. And we were just talking about New Orleans, your home state as well. So we got lots of great things here from the South. I'm just so happy to see you here in studio with me as opposed to just being on Skype. So it's great to have you. So now you kind of heard this setup here with the CI and the confidential informant and all of that. Explain a little bit to us what that means in the context of this case. And the Marine being shot. I mean, just as we were just setting that up earlier in the earlier segment.
Yeah, you know, we go back to this idea of chain of evidence, and this is the wellspring from where everything blossoms from, if you will. And so in this particular case, they're talking about conducting a buy vis-a-vis a confidential
CI,
informant.
right, that's the CI.
And
right.
so what they would do is that they go in, they have a controlled environment within this vehicle, they have taping equipment, taping dates me,
right.
but recording equipment in there as far as visual, audio, and they can kind of track everything that's going on within this environment to make sure that that all of the procedures were followed. Because, you know, one of the big things that will always come up in a case like this, people will shout entrapment, entrapment, entrapment. And of course, that makes any evidence that is gleaned from this through the poison tree moving forward. So they try to cover, every jot and tittle, if you will.
Now, let's just stop you in there for 1 second. Entrapment. We've already discussed that the marital privilege issue was, not just figured out before going to trial here. Entrapment, that would be something you as a forensic expert would see argued a lot as well, right?
Yeah, and it's an idea of trying to taint this knowledge base that you have to try to corrupt it in some way. And so we try to be very careful. And the agent, this guy's with the ATF. For folks at home that don't know, the ATF, this is what they do. They're all about firearms, okay? And so they're out conducting these buys. And he mentioned just at the end, I don't know if folks at home heard this, but he said, we have a huge database. And to say that it's a huge database is an understatement. This thing is massive, probably one of the largest in the world. So what they want to do is collect not just the physical evidence of the weapon, but what this individual is saying, what he is doing, anything he emotes in this transaction that takes place, and also what the CI is doing. And so all of that stuff, as the agent pointed out, will be kind of broken down. It'll be saved, secured. And this goes back to the original premise in investigations, and that is this chain of evidence. Keeping it pristine, untainted along the way. And it's very measured. Very, very measured along the way, because, trust me, this agent has been down the road. I'm sure that he's seen things that have been thrown out because
of that,
incorrect procedures. And so they get back they're going to take this weapon and put it into evidence. And he talked about running that serial number.
What does that mean to you?
Well, what it means is that there's a number on that weapon, and it can be found in any number of areas, and they will take this, and if there is a weapon that has been reported stolen, in this case, this particular jurisdiction, they got a hit in it in their system saying, you know, it's a red flag. This weapon has been stolen, and so that it's not just that they're buying a weapon. Now they've got a weapon that is part of a theft that's taken place. So that's going to send off red flags.
Does that mean that Jonathan Price then was shot with a stolen firearm?
I think that potentially that could be the case, and that's one of the things that they're going to move forward and try to prove.
Wow. All right. So interesting. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move forward here and go back to the courtroom. Again, Jonathan Price is the victim here. We're going to keep going though with some continues with some previously recorded testimony, and we'll come back with further analysis. Let's keep going with this analysis of the fascinating testimony. Let's keep going with it. Okay, so more information on the on how they got the gun and what they did with it. As a forensic expert, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think we got to see a picture of it,
yeah,
which is really cool.
Yeah,
you got
and
to see
of course
the image.
The jury wants to see that.
They do,
yes.
They do, and they saw the magazine
yes.
After it, and so they're talking about tracing. They're taking, and they had a great image here of the serial number. They're plugging that serial number in, and they're trying to get a hit off this thing. He had mentioned running this thing through NCIC, and that sent out the alert that Lexington had posted that
right.
they have a weapon that's
right.
involved in this.
Right.
So this is key. This is key. And
Very
so
critical.
you don't just
yes.
have Lexington involved in it. You got the ATFs kind of shoring things.
You got
here.
the feds
yep.
involved. Okay, very good. All right, we haven't seen a package on this case for a while. Just kind of give a roundup of the case. So let's do that right now. So just kind of give a little package roundup of the case. Let's run to that right now so you can just, we haven't seen that for a while, so let's take a look at that right now. Just give. So that gave you some background of the case, which is always great to have. Let's go now to some testimony that we've seen before that's going to get you right into the meat of the case. Here we go. Okay, we just, Joseph, what do you think so far about how the detective is doing on the stand? Now, he's weathering, as you said, you know, it's back and forth, all of these sort of sidebars that he's had, you know, but he's standing there, and do you think that, you know, you were saying that potentially, you know, his mind is wandering, but this is a death penalty case where we've got this Marine shot, and his wife, it was her birthday, shot. She could have been killed herself. And what you just said to me was stunning. And we looked at the CI buy there of the gun, that potentially that Jonathan Price may have been murdered, may have been assassinated with a stolen gun. Mm-hmm. And so all of that drama is happening or has happened. And we've got Jonathan Price, you know, gone, and his wife there. The testimony from her was you know, so you know, just you know, heart-rendering. Mm-hmm. And you've got this detective on the stand, and that you know, detective is there, and these sidebars go on and on and on. How do you think he's weathering that? Well,
he's probably doing the best he can. And let me back up and say one thing. I'm not saying his mind was wandering. I'm saying my mind was wandering, or would be in the past. I can only imagine trying to walk a mile in his shoes. You sit there for a while, and you know, you're only human. And so, but he's doing quite well. He's staying on point with all of the questions that are being asked of him. I find it interesting that the prosecutor is being very careful and very methodical. You know, reaching back and talking about procedure, and then trying to tie that back to what they actually did. And it does get a bit tedious, and it does wear on not just the witness potentially, but also on the jury, as we've previously stated.
Yeah, it goes back and forth, and you just wonder, you know, what the jury is thinking at this point, because they've had this kind of long. What do you think too? Now the jury is death penalty qualified. How many jury trials have you had as a forensic investigator where you've been in front of death penalty qualified jurors, and has it made a difference to you in your testimony, or does it really not matter whether the jurors are death penalty qualified?
No, it doesn't necessarily matter to me as you know, as a witness. For me, what mattered at that particular time was how good was the science that I was involved in? How good was the investigation that I was involved in? And I'm not talking about the peripherals involved. I'm talking about the stuff that I was responsible for. Did I do my job at that particular time? Because I view, you know, every single case that I was involved in, that someone's life is at stake here. And so you want to be very, very careful, be very thorough, and as dispassionate as you possibly can under these circumstances.
Right. So it doesn't really make a difference to you as a forensic investigator. No. What to you in this trial that you've looked at is the most important thing? If you were examining this case, if it were you to be on the stand, that you would be wanting to bring as an investigator on the stand, what would be the most important things that you would want to bring in your testimony?
I think that they've done a relatively good job with the ID package that they were talking about. I think that for me, those things that are physically tangible in this case, and that is going to be the round that ended this young Marine's life. That's something that's tangible that can be brought to bear in court. It's something that jury members can witness. And if you don't have the round, you always have the spent casings, and they can talk about the striations on the cylinder, on the outer portion of the shell casing itself, and how that ties back to the weapon. And then we go to this DNA, and this at a molecular level, you're putting it into the hand of an individual. It's going to be very curious to see how this thing has been processed and how thoroughly it was being processed.
Well, we have some other testimony from an earlier witness that we're going to go to. It was fascinating testimony that I want your analysis on, Joseph, in just a moment. So let's take another look at that, because your analysis on the gun expert was just stunning. That to think that Jonathan Price may have been assassinated, which I'm calling an assassination, by a stolen gun. So let's look at this testimony and come back after just a few moments. Wow, this was a sister of one of the defendants on the stand. And just so you are really knowing what happened here, just so it's really crystal clear, she had to identify her brother and identify him, and really put one of the pieces for the prosecution into play here. That's got to be hard. I mean, I don't care what your relationship is, how bad it is, or good it is with your sibling, to have to be on the stand there and be a prosecution witness against your brother and have to identify your brother on the stand in a death penalty case. Joseph Morgan, I know you're here as a forensic expert, but you're a human being, and wow.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in when you consider that. This is a key. This is key.
This is key.
This is identification.
Right. This is pretty early on in the case. This is identification.
Yeah. And that's that connectivity coming back.
Right.
And her testimony of positively identifying her brother could in fact lead to him receiving the death penalty. So yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Right.
And the depth here is really beyond. I don't know of anybody that has to experience something like this.
Right. What's important here, as you all know, is this is not a case of direct evidence in the sense that we have Jonathan there, dead on the street after the robbery with the defendants, these guys over him, and the officers, police being right there and capturing them. We don't have that kind of case. So the prosecutors here have to put the pieces together, as Joseph Morgan and I are talking about, forensically putting it together, with the confidential informant, with the buy of the gun, and all of that. And now with the identification from the sister of her brother in this death penalty case, because aggravated circumstances in Lexington, Kentucky, okay? So putting all of that together, this is that kind of case.
Yeah,
yes,
and
Joseph.
I think that this is key because they're going to have this overwhelming amount of forensic evidence here, and then the prosecution has the ability, because they vetted her as a witness, they're able to say, not only do we have the forensic evidence, we got something else for you here. We're going to have this guy's very own sister up here to positively identify him. And so that's very powerful, very, very powerful.
Now, how do you think that's important? I mean, I agree with you, but why do you think that is so important?
I don't know. I think that just for me, just witnessing this, it goes to validating what the police are putting forward. You know, that this guy was involved in some pretty shady dealings.
Right.
He brought about, the prosecution is saying they brought about the death of this young Marine. And we're going to have the sister, blood kin here, that's going to identify him.
I think
and
it's
that's
powerful.
Boy, it is. It's a
I think it's
sledgehammer.
powerful
Yeah,
stuff.
it sure
Wow.
is.
Speaking of sledgehammers, but in a different way, completely 180 way, let's go to Megan Price's 911 call.
Oh.
Let's hear that. I don't know how you can hear that and just not be so affected. I mean, that is just so devastating to hear Megan Price's 911 call. When, you know, you see the pictures of her there with her husband, but imagine her there with Jonathan Price just bleeding. Now, she's also shot. Megan is also shot in this scene, and she's also injured as these robbers run away. Now, these defendants are the ones that are allegedly to have done all of this, and the prosecution, with the detective on the stand today, is trying to prove that these guys are the ones that did it, trying to prove forensically. That's why we got Joseph Morgan here today to help us dissect the forensics here, that they're the ones that did it. But listening to that 911 call, I mean, forensically, what do you make of it? And then, I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, you know, as an investigator, when you show up on the scene, the bad stuff has already happened. You bear witness to it. And so what's really interesting here is that you hear it. You hear it firsthand, what she's going through, what she's witnessing. She's already stated here, I can't move my leg.
Right.
And,
she's been shocked.
She is in shock. And did you hear
that? Well, she's been shot. She's shot in shock, but she's also been shot.
Exactly. Right. And so the 911 operator, he does a great job of keeping her on the line and asking her information.
Right.
Asking her information time after time and drawing this out of her because, you know, let's face it, the 911 operator doesn't know if she's going to pass away at this point in time. And that's bone chilling. She is begging her husband to stay with her. I need you, Jonathan. I need you. You know, I love you. These sorts of things. And so and this injury that he has sustained that has passed, mind you, through his back and struck his heart. Life, as she knows it, is about to completely end. It's certainly ending for her husband there in that parking lot, and it's slipping away. Respirations are getting shallow, and he's going to pass away right there before her, and that's very, very powerful stuff in that courtroom.
And they're listening to that. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah. Let's go to the next clip and hear more of that. But by the way, before we do that, the jury has been on extended break. We don't know if they've gone home for the day. As soon as we know, we will come back to you. If there's more live testimony, of course, we'll go back to that. But just to keep you apprised of what's going on in the courtroom. We haven't missed anything. We have missed no live testimony. But let's go hear more of Megan's call and beyond. Well, the prosecutor is trying to elicit as much information as they can from Megan Price, who is a victim in this case, as well as the widow of Jonathan Price. She was shot in a leg during the altercation, during the robbery, and was there to witness her husband's shooting and death. And we heard before the 911 call, and now she's on the stand, and we're hearing the replay of her testimony, where the prosecution is trying to get as much information about what she saw and what she could how she could describe the assailants that horrible day, Joseph. what do you make so far of how she's doing? I mean,
Well, it's key, Lisa. And let me point out a couple of things here. She did a fantastic job of giving specific identifiers. She
Yes.
talked about white T-shirt. She talked about dreadlocks. She talked about
Dreadlocks,
race.
Yeah.
And here is key. At the very end, they asked her, "Do you know the difference between a revolver and a semi-automatic?"
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "What was it?" She said, "It's semi-automatic." She knew, and so that really kind of ties it together very, very tightly here.
Yeah, she can't make the identification of saying that that's the guy, that's the guy, which isn't surprising.
No, certainly not.
Not at all. This happened very quickly. It was a robbery. Don't forget, this was supposed to be, a robbery, and then there was a fight that ensued. So you're not surprised by the fact she can't make an actual identification. Are you?
No, her loved one, her husband,
Right.
newlyweds. He's bleeding to death at her feet. Her focus right then is on her husband, and that's key here. But she still came off with enough identifying information. She put them in the ballpark.
Right, and
Yep.
the gun.
Yes.
And the gun,
Yes.
and the fire. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. That was pretty amazing. Exactly. All right, let's go to the next clip because this is really good stuff. This is the meat and the heart of the case. Okay, let's hear some more. And by the way, if we have any more live testimony, we'll go back to that. I promise you. Next clip. All right, so we have Megan Price, the widow here of Jonathan Price, in this death penalty case being played out in Lexington, Kentucky. Just devastating testimony. We have now learned, though, for today, the jury has gone home. We've had a lot of back and forth with the lead detective in the case. Today, a lot of back and forth. I mean, not with the detective so much, but with the lawyers and the judge, back and forth with sidebar motions. But the jury has gone home. They'll be coming back tomorrow morning. So as soon as they come back, of course, Law&Crime will be there bringing you live testimony. But now we're hearing recorded testimony that's been of Megan Price that is just breaks your heart, right? Joseph Morgan, our forensic expert here today, you're from Jacksonville. I got to bring in Jacksonville State University, Alabama. It's just so great to have you actually here in studio as opposed to the little machine there in Skype that I always see you from. So it's great to have you here. But just listening to her, I mean, she now goes through and details even more. We get even more detail. And you said while we were listening to her that she appeared scared.
Yeah, she did. And can you imagine being in this environment with strangers? But there is somebody that you know in there. Yeah. Maybe it was a fleeting glance, but she's in the room with who she's identified potentially as the individuals that did this horrible crime that led to the death of her husband and, of course, her injury. Yeah, I think that she's scared. I think she's terrified probably to be up there on that stand. She looks so innocent up there and frail, and as well she should. Tough position to be in, but she's soldiered through it and has really kind of brought it home relative to what she saw. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, she's really the true witness here to what happened, and it was horrific.
She's the eyewitness.
She is
right.
the eyewitness in this case, and I don't know if folks at home can kind of grasp. We see a lot of the aftermath, the blood, and what the EMTs have done there and everything, but you see that there's evidence of devastation when you roll out on a scene like this. But to hear it firsthand from somebody that survived one of these events like this, it's horrific, and it puts it in a whole different light when you hear that eyewitness testimony and this event that changed so many people's lives. And I'm going to be interested to see if the prosecution is able to fold her testimony back into to the forensic testimonies they have to kind of shore things up, to validate with science what
right.
she bore witness to, and about relationship between the shooters and her husband, and the purse that they're talking about that's removed from her. Because as you mentioned, that was the target of this whole thing. This was a robbery. This was a robbery, and you sit back and you think, well, why in the world would somebody need to shoot these two people?
Right.
Over a purse
and a wallet.
Yeah, for about $60. Yeah, horrible situation.
Just unimaginable. But we can't imagine it because it did happen.
Yes.
So let's go back to hear more of Megan Price on the witness stand. Joseph, what do you make of that testimony? I mean, I just, she's crying. She's desperate to get through this testimony. I can just, every time when the tears are coming down, I can see her kind of just looking a little bit sideways. And I'm wondering if she's looking at the defendants just a little bit, if she's getting just an eye of them, you know, just a peek of them. It is just, my heart just goes out to her. I don't know this woman. I've never met her, but I just, my heart goes out to her.
Yeah, very difficult situation. And still she pushes on through.
She does.
She goes into great description about what happened, him being pushed to the truck, him being shot. And she even gives details about what they did to her husband after that point. And this is key. She remembered that before they walked away, they reached into his back pocket and took this young man's wallet. And that's burned into her memory. And then he asked her, you know, could you render assistance to him? No, I've been shot in the leg at that point in time. So yeah, this is very powerful testimony. And again, this is, you know, in a physical sense, it's a dance that took place at that scene where people are moving around. It's one of the things we look at in forensics and analysis of crime scenes, the movement of these individuals, where they were positioned relative to the victims, the shooting victims, where they spent casings ejected, and that's going to give us an attitude of distance, of relationship, trajectory of fire, this sort of thing. And she had talked about how there was fists being thrown and punches and all this sort of thing. Yeah. And
she said scuffling, and she said no. I mean, she tried. It was punches. It was fighting. Fighting.
Yeah. She had an awareness of that. So, and this is another piece of this is key. I hope that they collected evidence sufficiently on this young man's body because there is physical contact that's going on here, according to the wife.
Exactly.
So we'll see how that bears out.
Let's go to, we have time for one more clip from Megan Price. Let's go to that. The widow in this case, the widow of Jonathan Price, is looking at the defendants. I just can tell. We're looking. Joseph Morgan and I are sitting here, and we're mapping out the courtroom, and we're looking at it, and we're looking at what her perspective would be, and we agree, right, that she, especially when she's crying, when the tears are coming, it's what she's looking at, those defendants.
Right.
I don't know if it's fear or anger, or maybe a combination of both, or maybe those emotions are going to change, you know, as she's going through this testimony. Now it's concentrated on her injuries, as we were talking about. The entrance and the exit wound on her leg. Yeah,
and she went into detail talking about the surgery that she had endured. She said she had 9 screws in her leg. This round passed through what we refer to as just superior to the knee, and traversed and fractured the femur with a big bone in our leg, and then came out of the back. She had to go through extensive surgery. She's lucky she's not dead because she could have bled out as well at the scene if this thing had clipped her femoral artery. And she's certainly brave. We saw how she kind of rotated in her chair. And one of the things I noticed when I was looking at this young lady, she's got one of his Marine Corps ribbons on her chest there. And I find that quite compelling as well. And she's certainly a brave young lady.
She is, and to take the stand and to be testifying about this and just being, you know, going through this, your heart just goes out to her.
It does.
All right, let us take a look, one last look for the day at Law&Crime's top crimes so far this week as we are into the end of our day Tuesday. Let's take a look at Law&Crime's top crimes so far this week. It's interesting taking a look at those top crime stories for today, Tuesday. You know, you have something as crazy as a bedside manner with this doctor who has no bedside manner, and then something as the Drew Peterson case, of a case that started in 2004, really, with the disappearance and death of his wife, now going to the Supreme Court. All over the place, Joseph Morgan, but you've testified, I'm sure, in. It's been such a pleasure to have you here today in Law&Crime. And thank you so much, viewers, for watching with us today. Really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you all tomorrow on the other side. Law&Crime. Take care.